Present and Future, Part 1, Planetary Alignments.
Courier Mail, March 982. The world won't end tomorrow.
And it didn't. There has been much discussion in recent years about so-called alignments of the planets and their possible effects. Centre of the controversy has been this book, The Jupiter Effect, by scientists John Gribben of England and Stephen Pageman of NASA. This book has been grossly misquoted, especially by people in astrology and religion. These people claim that all the planets would line up like this. The authors of the book said no such thing, nor would any scientist who calculated the position of the planets. However, all kinds of doomsday predictions have been made concerning the weather, volcanoes, earthquakes, and even the end of the world. During man's existence, the Earth has undergone many dramatic changes. The most outstanding climatic event would have been the flood, the great flood of some 4,500 years ago. Was it merely a local flood, or is it possible that the whole Earth could have been flooded at the one time? Every culture in the world has legends and writings about a flood and 8 survivors in a large boat. There's not enough water in the atmosphere now for 40 days and 40 nights of rain all over the Earth, but let's see if there ever was. We can learn from other planets. Saturn is over 700 times the volume of Earth, and it spins about once every 10 hours. That's more than twice as fast as the Earth spins. Saturn throws a shadow on its rings, indicating that they consist of solid materials. This photo was taken through a high-powered telescope. Here is an artist's impression of those rings. It is believed that they are mostly ice with rocks and dust particles. If somehow the planet had suddenly slowed down, these rings would collapse onto the surface. Jupiter is really a giant. It's over 1,300 times the volume of Earth. And here is a photo of Jupiter. The coloured bands are believed to be collapsed rings like the ones we just saw on Saturn. Many scientists believe that the Earth is now spinning slower than in the past, and that most of the water in our oceans was at one time a liquid canopy above the atmosphere. They call this the canopy theory. The canopy would have surrounded the Earth as this cutaway drawing shows. If something caused the Earth to slow down, the water canopy would have collapsed. Now, what could cause the Earth to slow down? If a giant comet came close enough, its gravitational pull could slow the Earth down and cause the water canopy to collapse. Scientists have calculated that the downfall would be 25 inches per hour for more than a month, so that 2/3 of the Earth's surface is now underwater. The average depth is over 2 miles. In Genesis 7:11,
all the fountains of the great deep were broken up and burst forth, and the windows and floodgates of the heavens were opened, and it rained upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights.
The fountains of the great deep were broken up. What does that mean? Tides are caused by the moon pulling on the sea. We get tides up to 20 feet or more, but what is not generally known is that the moon also lifts the Earth's surface 6 to 10 inches. Buildings and concrete structures sometimes crack due to heating and cooling of day and night, but they are also affected by the pull of the overhead moon. You may remember in 1960, a violent earthquake in Chile caused part of the offshore seabed to rise, lifting the ocean above it. The result was a tidal wave 50 feet high that raced across the Pacific at 500 miles an hour. It drowned thousands of people in Japan 10,000 miles away. What would happen if all the fountains of the Great Deep were broken up? Halley, after whom Halley's Comet was named, was a great mathematician and physicist. He said,
if all the seabeds had risen up at the one time, it would have produced a tidal wave 7 miles high, travelling 1,000 miles an hour at the equator.
How would Noah's Ark survive that? Well, according to Genesis, it rained 40 days and 40 nights, so Noah's Ark would have already been afloat in the local flooding caused by the rain. It would have been able to ride out the giant waves which followed the rain. Now, is there any evidence of a worldwide flood? This mammoth in the Leningrad Museum is one of thousands found frozen and preserved with undigested tropical food in their stomachs. Tropical food grows in warm climates, not near glaciers. Glaciers move only a few feet a year. It would have been a very unusual animal that was overtaken by a glacier. Perhaps a few of them tripped, but thousands of them? Right around the world, there are vast animal cemeteries where the bones of every kind of animal are piled up together as though they were swirled around and dumped in heaps. Near the North Pole, we find animals so well preserved that the meat can still be eaten. Autopsies show that they were all drowned in salt water. And what about the ancient towns they dig up? What buries a town under 10, 20, 50 feet of mud? What drowns, instantly freezes and also buries animals at the one time? It's not possible to give a full explanation in this lecture. A tape on Noah's flood is available afterwards, but consider these points. When Noah finally came out of the ark, he saw for the first time a rainbow. Now think about this. God told Noah,
I shall set a rainbow in the clouds as a sign to you and future mankind that I will not flood the earth again.
Now why had Noah never seen a rainbow before? Rainbows occur when sunlight is refracted into 7 colours by raindrops. But in Genesis chapter 2, before the flood,
God had not yet caused it to rain upon the earth, but there went up a mist, a fog vapour, from the land and watered the whole surface of the ground.
This also supports the idea of the earth previously spinning faster than it does today. Here is planet Earth, a photo from space. It's a beautiful sight, especially if you're an astronaut coming home. Notice here the blackness of space, no stars. Our atmosphere is like a gigantic magnifying lens. In space, you cannot see the stars without a telescope. Astronauts report that from the moon, they cannot see any stars with the naked eye. Have you noticed how large the sun seems on the horizon? Yet, as it gets higher in the sky, it appears to get smaller. Our atmosphere also makes the moon appear larger on the horizon. It is this magnifying lens effect that lets us see the stars with the unaided eye. This is Pleiades. Have you seen the stars on a clear night out in the country? How could the ancients know so much about Pleiades and other star groups that we need a telescope to see now? Were they told about them? Or did the water canopy magnify the stars so that they could actually see them? The night skies before the flood must have been magnificent. Genesis 1:6.
And God said, let there be a firmament, the expanse of the sky in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters below from the waters above. And God made the firmament, the expanse, and separated the waters which were under the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse.
Now how did the writer of Genesis know that before the flood there was a water canopy? This stone tablet in the British Museum is the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Assyrian record from the 7th century BC. It also tells the story of Noah and the Great Flood. This shows how the growth rings of trees provide scientists with accurate records of climatic changes for each year of the tree's life. Many trees are thousands of years old, so we do have a reliable dating system. Noah's flood is the worst weather catastrophe in recorded history. Dr. Velikovsky has written books on many subjects, including Noah's flood. He goes to great trouble to document the archaeological findings of various dating systems and ancient writings. So be careful with your opinion on the flood until you've read these 3 books. They are exceptionally well presented and documented. Those yellow dots show the earthquakes recorded since 1960. New Zealand and New Guinea are on a line around the Pacific. This line is known as the Pacific Ring of Fire. This shows the bed of the Pacific Ocean with the waters removed. You can see the gigantic lines of stress over the seabed. Do you dream of a peaceful South Sea Island paradise far from the troubles of the world? The South Sea Islands are really the tips of undersea volcanoes. Australia is on a single plate. The West Australian side is rising while the eastern edge is sinking. A major earthquake anywhere around the Pacific could cause tidal waves and perhaps trigger further earthquakes. The 1960 earthquake in Chile caused a mountain range to sink 6,000 feet in 24 hours. Let's hope that doesn't happen on the east coast of Australia. At the top left, you see a red line up the west coast of America. This well-known fault line has caused problems in the past, so let's take a closer look. Here is an aerial photo of a section of the San Andreas Fault, which extends 600 miles down the United States west coast. The San Andreas Fault is a particularly nasty one. It moves sideways in sudden shifts. This reinforced concrete freeway snapped like a toothpick in 1971 when the fault line merely shuddered. The big earthquake in 1906 not only damaged the countryside as shown here. Thousands of people were killed in Los Angeles and San Francisco. If you had survived that earthquake, would you consider rebuilding and living there? It's amazing how many people did. Here is a map showing two major fault lines through San Francisco. What would happen to the enormous population living there now if a big earthquake struck suddenly? Here is the sun's surface, or chromosphere. Those black spots over to the left are sunspots, or holes in the sun's surface. Sunspots occur in pairs. Here are three photographs of one pair of sunspots using different filtering techniques. One sunspot could be called positive, the other negative. Sunspots are a tear or a hole in the burning chromosphere. It is through these holes that scientists have been able to study the inner core of the sun with gamma-ray shift detectors. Here is a drawing of the sun. The core is shown black. The outer surface, or chromosphere, is a thin layer of burning gas rotating once every 28 days. The inner core of the sun is a gigantic nuclear reactor. Its temperature reaches 16 million degrees centigrade, the centre is 11 times as dense as lead, and it spins 6 times faster than the Earth. What would happen if the sun was upset, even slightly? This drawing shows how a solar flare would burst out of a positive sunspot and be attracted to a negative sunspot over to the right. These holes in the chromosphere also allow powerful outbursts of electromagnetic energy from the core. This photograph shows a solar flare erupting about 200,000 miles from the sun's surface. When several pairs of sunspots occur closely together, the polarity interference prevents the flame from curving back to its opposite number, and the flame is then deflected out into space where it condenses into gas. This gas is charged with electromagnetic radiation from the sun's interior, and it streams outwards through the solar system, affecting all the planets. This is solar wind. It upsets our weather. The Earth has a hot molten interior in layers. When electromagnetic solar wind hits us, it can also upset the Earth's magnetic field and the spin rate of the core. This accelerating and breaking of the spin rate can put strain on the Earth's surface, causing volcanoes and earthquakes. It is well known that every 179 years, all of the 9 planets are on the same side of the sun, but this appears to have little effect on the sun or on the Earth, as the 9 planets are spread right around 180 degrees. From 4000 BC to 1977, there have been 73 occasions when 6 or more planets were within 60 degrees. This tight grouping is called a planetary alignment. Most alignments have been centuries apart with little or no apparent effects, but a series of planetary alignments, one after the other, in a short space of time, would have a built-up shockwave effect. Has this ever happened? Well, 4,500 years ago, there were 8 alignments in a 100-year period. That's an average of 1 every 14 years. Is it a coincidence that that series of alignments was followed by Noah's flood? Also, 3,500 years ago, there were 3 alignments in only 20 years. That was followed by major weather problems, earthquakes and volcanoes, as recorded in Jewish history at the time of the Exodus from Egypt. Also in the history and tradition of most other cultures around the world. From 1978 to 1986, we will have 15 alignments in only 8 years. Computer calculations show nothing like this in the past 20,000 years. Gravity is not the only force involved in a series of alignments. There are at least 25 factors to consider when groups of planets interact with each other. 2 of the most important factors are electrostatic and magnetic forces which affect the sun. This article in a leading daily newspaper was published as scientific fact, and yet at the top right they show the 2 planets, Uranus and Saturn, both going around on the same orbit simultaneously. No doubt, pseudo-scientific sensationalism increases revenue for newspapers, radio and TV stations and planetariums. This is how alignments occur. The diagram shows the relative movements of the planets from March 5 to April 26, 1982, a period of 52 days. Some planets have moved considerably, while others have moved only a few degrees.
Stand by for the weather news. It's all bad and worse to come.
Dr. W.H. Epp, University of California, Dr. Roger Clark, London University, and numerous others around the world say the effects will not be necessarily immediate. However, they have forecast the following.
A disturbed magnetic activity in the sun producing huge firestorms. The ionosphere of the Earth will be changed. Radio and TV communications will be disrupted. There will be weird lighting effects from aurora borealis. There will be vast changes in wind patterns. Rainfall and temperature patterns will change. Earth's rotation and the length of the days may change. Many earthquakes will occur.
So let's see what's happened since 1978.
April 78, the sun flares up.
This photograph, taken by astronomers, appeared in newspapers around the world. Solar storms are quite normal, but this was really unusual. The biggest sunspot previously recorded was in 1947. This photo shows the giant solar flare that erupted 800,000 miles out of the sunspot. But by November 78, the April flare-up had grown to 5 times the size of this one.
Sunday Mail, November 78. A giant sunspot bombarding the Earth with 20 million particles a second could be responsible for Europe's disastrous summer and other unprecedented weather freaks. Since the huge sunspot first appeared in July 78, the world's weather has seemingly gone haywire. Now meteorologists are predicting a blizzard-scourged European winter with heavier than usual snowfall and vicious frosts.
That forecast was made in November 78. The Northern Hemisphere has suffered extremely cold winters each year since 1978.
February 79. At least 37 have died in snow and freezing winds that have brought icy chaos to Europe as far south as Spain.
In May 1980, only 4 weeks after an alignment, the first of a series of eruptions occurred at Mount St. Helens in America. 1,300 feet of the mountaintop was blasted away. 22,000 acres of timberland was destroyed. At least 60 people were killed, including magazine photographers who were told that they were at a safe distance. In 1980, earthquakes occurred for the first time in many places. The best known major earthquakes were in Algeria, New Hebrides and Italy. This shows areas of major damage near Naples, Mount Vesuvius and Pompeii. On the first night, a violent earthquake followed by 33 tremors severely damaged 10,000 square miles and killed thousands of people.
Sukhumi, down on the Black Sea, is to the Russians what surface paradise is to Australians, a place of eternal sunshine. But this year, 1980, something went wrong. For the first time in history, the place was covered in snow.
Those are palm trees.
September 81. A strong earthquake rolled through Los Angeles yesterday, shaking the city area for about 15 seconds.
This is quite normal in Los Angeles, but what would happen if they had a big earthquake?
January 82. Freezing Britain goes underwater. Floods, ice and fog provided a grim start to the new year for much of Britain, with hundreds of roads in the South and Midlands underwater. Cars left in an emergency parking area in Birdcage Walk, London. Parts of Britain were colder than the South Pole. April 82. Spring blizzard, described as America's worst on record, seems to hold Wayne Goldstein frozen as he walks on Boston Common. Boston and New York City received up to 60 centimetres of snow and winds peaked at 80 kilometres an hour. Transport was in chaos with 50 cars and trucks involved in one pile-up in Des Moines. Chicago, on the shores of partly frozen Lake Michigan, the worst northern winter anyone can recall.
Apart from these few sensational events, the media appears to be playing down many of the natural disasters occurring with greater frequency worldwide. Courier Mail, June 82.
A solar flare so huge that scientific instruments were unable to measure it shot from the sun's surface on Sunday, June the 6th.
Since 1978, there have been solar flares, earthquakes and volcanoes, all occurring 4 to 6 weeks after each alignment. Why does the media play these things down? Is it because extremes in climatic changes have occurred before, such as the mini ice age in Europe in the 16th century? Here are townspeople skating on frozen canals in Holland during that big freeze. Or are they afraid the public will panic?
How would you stay alive?
This was printed in 1978 by the Australian Government Publishing Service. Are they expecting earthquakes and weather problems in Australia in the near future? For several years, the United States has been building underground cities around the world, each providing for up to 6,500 politicians, bureaucrats and scientists, supposedly in the event of a nuclear war. These underground cities have storehouses packed with supplies, facilities and amenities for their protection and comfort. People in Alice Springs report semi-trailer loads of goods and supplies heading towards the Pine Gap complex. We'll have a look at Pine Gap later. Washington 77. The Doomsday Machine is the operation standing by to get certain people to different cities in the event of a so-called nuclear war. Several cities are mentioned.
The other still classified headquarters are buried deep below mountains in the Washington area. There are 96 bunkers and bolt holes known by the Pentagon code name Noah's Ark. The list of the chosen few allowed to flee to them if a nuclear attack was imminent is probably the best kept secret in America.
Another city is
Mount Weather, a massive subterranean city carved out of a mountain about 75 kilometres west of Washington.
Noah's Ark and Mount Weather sound more like shelters against weather problems. If they were really for protection during nuclear war, you would expect names like Sodom and Gomorrah, Brimstone, or something like that, wouldn't you? No one can be sure when the effects of the alignments will reach their peak. Is it possible that these chosen few have studied the alignments and are preparing? Could there be some connection between the alignments, the unusual weather patterns, and these underground cities? In the next part, we'll investigate some other things that you and I are not supposed to know about. Past, Present and Future, Part 2, Conspiracy, one of the darkest words in human history. British
So I'm going to preface this film and try to put some things that you've already heard today into some form of perspective. You've heard us talk a lot about energy, about suppressed technology, about hidden governance, about groups of people who want to manipulate populations for reasons they really won't listen to me because their mind is still closed. They don't understand what is happening to them. When a silent weapon is applied, gradually, ladies and gentlemen, the public adjusts, adapts to its presence, and learns to tolerate its encroachment on their lives until the pressure, psychological, via economic, becomes too great, and they simply crack up. Therefore, the silent weapon is a type of biological warfare. It attacks the vitality, options, and mobility of the individuals of a society by knowing, understanding, manipulating, and attacking their sources of natural and social energy, and their physical, mental, and emotional strengths and weaknesses, and they become depressed, and they don't understand what's happening, and they're bombarded with more violence